Hello, how's everybody doing? Does anybody know what week this is? Is this the first week? Is this the last week? About week 4, right? Week 4. Again, does anybody remember the name of the school? This is McDonald University? No? International School of the East. What's the name of the class? What kind of history? American history? No, that was last quarter. Asian history. Yay. Okay, so this is scheduled for 7/27/20. Okay, so this class is for 7/27/20. If you want to know the week, it's the fourth week. Usually, if I'm teaching in person, the fourth week is a review. But this is a little bit different in computer classes. So I wouldn't cover new material, but I have to. So don't worry. This material today, which has anybody looked at the syllabus? Do you know what I'm supposed to be covering? George Washington? No. I'm going to be covering the roots of Mao Zedong. Hopefully you know what country Mao Zedong came from. So this material today on Mao Zedong will not be on the midterm. Okay. So as I said, what I'm taping now, you will get the 27th of July. And this will be the fourth week. The chapter is a little short because it's only covering one person. It's not covering a whole group of people like Mongolian history and Genghis Khan put together. So it's just the roots, the beginnings of Mao Zedong. And then I'll stop it, and then we'll go into verifying the questions that I've given you the first 3 weeks, not today's, the first 3 weeks. And that'll be the review for today, okay? But also remember, you have a responsibility, right? So not just to be lazy and to take what I put in front of you, okay? So you're supposed to read and follow along on the lecture, and you can look at it as many times as you want. So I might ask a question that's not one of the questions I chose for the chapter outline, but usually I pick really easy stuff. So, and that's just to stop people because I have some students that, let's say they don't listen to the lecture and they get the questions from somebody else and they just follow the questions in line. So I change it and they don't even pay attention. They're not realizing that, it's a test. So they're just thinking that they wouldn't. So what I say by not paying attention, let's say the first question I give you is, what's your name? And the second question I give you is, what's your age? Okay. Now, usually a student looks at the test and reads it and it's easy to answer. But a student who's just copying, when I change those over and I change age to number 1 and name to number 2, there will be students that will answer, what's your age? They'll say, Park Gune. And then they'll say, what's your name? And they'll put 22, right? So I just do this to catch you and to make sure you're paying attention. I don't do it to give you a really difficult question like, hey, I don't think we read about that. Just want to keep you honest and pay just a little attention and not concentrate on cheating. But I don't think my students will cheat, would they? That possible? I don't think so. Kind of scary, huh? So anyway, like I told you, the chapter will be a little short. And then I'm going to go and give you the answers for the first 3 weeks' questions, right? Okay. So we're ready to start? Okay. Go to that delicious reading. So again, HIS 103, Asian History. Let me put myself in the corner there. before, like I said. Okay, so like I said, the rise, the beginning of Mao Zedong. Okay, so here we go. So again, this won't be covering his whole life. It's just the beginning. Like, who was this guy? Where did he come from? In China, how did he appear? Okay. So the rise of Mao Zedong, science and democracy, had been the great slogan of China's May 5th movement, which came much later. And as late as the end of 1919, the man who would become the first leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Chen, oh, I need my Chinese students here for pronunciation, Chen Duxi, was still advocating an Anglo-American model of democracy in China. So before I go into translating a word here, look at that. How different would history be with the first leader of the Communist Party, which was not in China, Mao? He wanted an Anglo-American model of democracy. So maybe China would not have become communist. Wow. But as you will see with history, you know, life plays great tricks on people. What they plan to do and what happens are, as we say, two different things, right? So we have a thing here, slogan on the very first line, slogan. So most companies have a slogan. You guys love In-N-Out hamburger. Do you know what In-N-Out's slogan is? You have any idea? Okay, no. So In-N-Out, that's what a hamburger's all about. Okay, my Korean students, what is LG's slogan? Some know and some don't have any idea. Anybody know LG's slogan? Okay, LG's slogan is life is good. I used to have an LG TV, and every time I turn it on, it would yell, life is good. And I would say, really? I'd like to know when that starts, right? So their slogan was science, which of course was to build a country that was so poor, and then democracy. But a democracy for all, well, that didn't really turn out that way. Okay. Then you have the word advocating, which means you're talking about and pushing forward, supporting whatever you are. Like right now, we have a lot of these people that are attacking the police in a couple of cities around the United States and burning buildings. They are advocating to get rid of police. So I don't understand how you attack the police and then say the police are bad, we got to get rid of them. But that's what they are advocating. Okay, so let me continue. By 1920, however, he became a self-proclaimed Marxist. So that comes from the famous Karl Marx, father of socialism, which came into communism. During a period of profound disillusionment among many of the more radical May 4th intellectuals in the spring of 1920, a Comintern agent arrived in Beijing from Moscow with details of the Bolshevik model for revolutionary organization. Okay, so again, there's some big words here I should go over. Okay, during a period means during a certain time. Profound is very deep understanding of something. Here we're going to add disillusionment, but a lot of times, let's say, certain individuals go through life and they're just concerned about making as much money as they can and don't concern themselves and don't realize how profound the knowledge is of, let's say, loving their wife or loving their family or loving their kids. And then when they get older and some bad emotional things happen, they somehow have a proud or a profound understanding of, oops, there's more to life than working 80 hours a week, right? Okay, disillusionment means kind of like disappointment, right? And usually disillusionment means disappointment after you've believed in something very strongly for a long period of time. And then something happens and now you're disillusioned and you don't believe it anymore, right? That happens sometimes with people who are very religious. And then a very close family member dies without any reason, then they become disillusioned with God. So, but here the disillusionment was with the Communist Party after the May 4th intellectuals. And then in the spring of 1920, so this is a Russian communist agent arrived in Beijing with details of the Bolshevik model, kind of a success plan. Bolsheviks were the red contingent that fought against the traditional government of Russia and Tsar Nicholas. It was the organizational effectiveness of Bolshevik discipline more immediately than any theoretical appeal of Marxism that resulted in the creation of the Chinese Communist Party. So remember that information because it talks about the creation of the Chinese Communist Party. The first Chinese Marxist cells, which means people that were trained by Russian communists, emerged out of a study group in Beijing in 1920. In 1921, there were roughly, which means about, 50 Chinese communists only. The first Congress of the Chinese Communist Party convened or met in secret that summer, holding its opening session in a girls' school in the French Concession. Okay, I'm at the middle of the page now. Okay, in Shanghai, where if I have Gao this quarter, that's Gao's hometown. So let me see here. I don't want to go over. Okay, so I'll look for telltale. Okay, in its early years, the Chinese Communist Party remained under the general direction of the Comintern in Moscow. And because the Soviet Union, meaning Russia, had also reached an agreement with Sun Yat-sen and the Chinese Nationalist Party in 1923, there followed a brief period of cooperation between these two Chinese parties. Chiang Kai-shek's sudden purge, which means you purge a group of people, you get rid of them. Sudden purge of leftists in April 1927. However, you see now we moved to 27. However, dealt the communists a devastating blow. This disaster was compounded by misguided communist efforts to stage uprisings in several cities that year. In a desperate effort to maintain some connection with the urban industrial working class, the so-called proletariat, or people's organization, which according to the Marxist theory, the Communist Party was supposed to represent. All these uprisings failed, however. During the last one, the so-called Canton Commune, in December 1927, participants wore red scarves on their neck or armbands as a kind of uniform. After the uprising was crushed or stopped in a very strong way, these were hastily removed, which means they try to quickly remove them. But someone discovered with the telltale red stains on their skin from the scarf, I guess running around and sweating made it stain your skin, was executed, meaning shot and killed on the spot. In the chaos after Chang's purge, at one point even Mao Zedong was caught by the nationalist soldiers and only narrowly managed to escape. So look at that too. He escaped. Had he not escaped and been killed like the other red scarf wearing people, history would have been a lot different, no? Okay, so that brings me to the bottom of the page. Okay, which means I'm going to have to go to questions. Whiteboard. Questions out. Put the book over here. Right. Go get my pencil. Okay, you ready for question one? Unfortunately for me, it's a long question for me, a short answer for you, maybe. Uh-oh. Computer's acting bad again. Bad. Number one, what resulted in the creation of the Chinese Communist Party? Remember I mentioned that in the reading about pay attention to this certain part. This will give you the answer. So repeating, you just pay attention to that part and you'll be fine. Okay. Ready for question two? Okay, two. In the early years, right, the early years of the movement, who directed China's Communist Party? Now pay attention to that. That might be a good trick question I can ask you later on the final. Because maybe the answer is not obviously Mao Zedong, right? Maybe it's Kim Jong-un. I don't know. But you know, so in the early years of the movement, who directed China's Communist Party? So I'll give you a minute to answer those. I only got two questions. It's a short page. Let me mark off that we've read this page. I've asked you these questions. Then we shall go back to the reading. Okay, I'm gonna go to the eraser now. It's probably been enough time for you to write these down. So, eraser. Okay, so repeating one, what resulted in the creation of the Chinese? So, in other words, something happened which caused it to happen, okay? And two, in the early years, who directed China's Communist Party? I'm gonna go with Kim Jong-un, how's that, okay? All right. So I'm going to go back to the reading material. Okay, so we ended with narrowly managed to escape at the bottom. Let me move over. All right. Steadily we go. The Chinese communists were driven underground or out into the countryside. As devastating, which means like destroying, as devastating as this purge was, however, it also gave young Mao Zedong a chance to try a radically unorthodox approach to Marxism, peasant revolution. Okay, a couple of strange words there. Radically. So radically is something really, really different than what is normally done. You take a radical approach to something. And he was not, so here he was not going to try what was taught by Marx. He was going to try something more unique to his situation in China at the time. And then unorthodox, we have a word, the opposite word is orthodox, which means kind of normal or regular. And unorthodox is something not regular. I can tell you something different. Okay, so for example, you know, I've been to Mexico and I see how they make Mexican food. And it is their own style of cooking technique. One time I was in the island of Jeju-do in South Korea and I found some small little Mexican restaurant. I talked to the owner and I ordered, and he had a big door open so I could see him cooking the Mexican food. And to me, it was unorthodox because he was cooking Mexican food with giant chopsticks. Okay, so that's not your normal or regular approach or technique. And then peasant revolution means the poor people, the people who have nothing. So get them excited. And there's mass numbers of that at the time in China, and you'll have a pretty good sized army. That was Mao's thinking. Continuing, Mao's faith in the revolutionary potential or future of peasants stood orthodox Marxism on its head. So what that means, stood it on its head, means again, it was just so different that the traditional Marxist thinking is hard to understand. And the people around him, the other communists, they just didn't believe at first in what he was doing. In theory, the communist revolution was supposed to be driven by objective material conditions at a particular stage of historical development through class struggle between workers and wealthy industrialists in the most advanced modern capitalist economies. But as you shall see, Mao was starting out way in the countryside. So there were no big capitalist economy there or wealthy industrialists. And China was very, very poor at the time. So he felt he had to change the Marxist and communist plan a little differently to suit the China situation. So as you can see here, he'll say it himself. But Mao believed he could adapt the general Marxist, Leninist principles to China's unique circumstances and tap into the explosive desires of the peasantry as a force that might bring communism to power even before material conditions made it inevitable. So what they're trying to say there is the traditional Marxist-Leninist principles is you wait till the appropriate time. You wait till a situation is favorable to your thinking. But Mao did not want to wait and felt that millions of poor people in China, if he can kind of brainwash them to his thinking, then that's a large force to deal with, right? And you promise them the world, they will fight for you. Mao had faith that with the right leadership, meaning himself, and indoctrination is what I said, brainwashing, a proletariat consciousness or a people's consciousness. Everybody has to think the same. Could then be instilled, which means taught until you can remember it easily, into the peasantry and advance socialist goals eventually realized, because that's what the masses will push towards. Interesting stuff. Okay, I'm in the middle of the page. Chiang Kai-shek's purge, 1927. Do I have to explain who Chiang Kai-shek is? I have two ladies from Taiwan, Wani and Yishuan. I think Yishuan is related to Chiang Kai-shek, I'm not sure. But he was the generalissimo of China's nationalist army. They were not communists. Okay? Chiang Kai-shek's purge in 1927 gave Mao a chance to put his theories to the test. At Mount Qinggang in Jiangxi, in southeastern China, Mao led about 2,000 followers to begin developing a rural communist base late in 1927. If you remember the first page in 1920, I think they only had 200, 300 communists at the time in China. 7 years later, there's 2,000, led by Mao. There, they began experimenting with techniques for gaining. Let me move the page. Support of poorer farmers through a program of forced land redistribution backed by the guns of the newly created Red Army. Now you get a couple of thousand people, you can start creating small armies. Pay attention to this forced land redistribution. What's bad about that is, let's say you worked hard and you inherited this big, beautiful farm from your father in China. Now the government says that's not yours anymore. It belongs to the people. We're going to divide it up, right? But you have enough poor people that will fight and say, thank you, because I have nothing. So I'll even take maybe just an acre. Continuing. They also began developing innovative tactics of guerrilla warfare to compensate for the Red Army's conventional military weakness. So let me explain this. This is a little tricky. Innovative is like creative, right? Create new tactics. Tactics means techniques. And for guerrilla warfare. And guerrilla warfare, the American colonists fought against the British with guerrilla warfare, which means the British Army was too strong and too experienced, so they could not fight them just face to face. They had to hide in the forest, hide in trees, hide in buildings, and attack them when they could. And that's what Mao's Chinese army, especially at the time, because their conventional military weakness, they did not have enough troops or ammunition like Chiang Kai-shek did. So they have to do this sneaky style fighting to survive. Although this style of peasant revolution was criticized, by the Chinese Communist Central Committee, and they were above Mao. Don't forget that at this time. Mao was for a time beyond their effective reach and free to experiment because he was in the countryside, and I'll tell you where exactly. Details are murky, but Mao's rural Jiangxi base was successful enough that it eventually expanded, now listen to this, to include several million people. Now you can have some effective armies. So it says details are murky. That means cloudy. We are not sure exactly what happened. And rural means way out in the countryside. But this base was successful enough, it eventually expanded to include several million people. So you've now indoctrinated a lot of these peasants, telling them that you will take farms and lands from the rich and give them some things. Right? Success brought unwanted attention, however. That's not good. Chinese Communist Party leaders began drifting into the rural Jiangxi base from their beleaguered urban headquarters in Shanghai, about 32. So all the Central Committee all the way in Shanghai, but they started trying to find Jiangxi, and eventually they did in 1932. These newly arriving leaders were still oriented toward Moscow and critical of Mao's peasants or poor people's deviations from orthodox Maoist theory. I explained this earlier. Before long, Mao was removed from real decision-making power in the Communist Party. A lot of American people don't know this. And there are even rumors that at one point he may have been placed under house arrest, although this has been denied by the, I guess, the Chinese Communist government. Who knows, it probably was true, but they have to deny it to make it look better than what it was. Okay, at the bottom here, Chiang Kai-shek's attention had also been caught by Mao's rural experiment in Chiang's nationalist armies. Now, I shall move the page. Let me see, I want to make sure this is correct. Let me see. Okay, that's the first. Okay, I'll look for that. Okay. Launched a series of military campaigns against this agrarian communist base in the southeast. So what this means is Chiang Kai-shek started military attacks. Agrarian means farmers. So this communist farmers base in the southeast. You remember it's Jiangxi. The first nationalist attacks were repulsed or pushed out by communist guerrilla tactics, the tactics that I told you prior. But in 1934, as time continued, nationalistic forces succeeded in totally destroying the communist base in Jiangxi. Before it was overrun, however, in 1934, a core group of about 8,000 to 6,000 communist cadres and Red Army soldiers managed to break out of the nationalist encirclement. So that means that the army had them encircled, and began what is known today as the Long March. Yes, the Long March. Gao can tell us about that. Initially, this was something of an aimless flight from disaster, but eventually a pre-existing communist base area in Jiangxi province in the arid and poor northwest was decided on as a destination. Of the large number who had begun the Long March, And believe it or not, that's the end of the big page there. So, but I got some words here. So initially means at the start, and was an aimless flight from disaster, which means basically people just were fleeing for their lives. But eventually, there was already another Chinese communist base in the Shanxi province, which is arid and poor, so probably like a desert area. And they decided, okay, we'll run to there. Okay? And of the large number who had begun the long march, only about 7,000 or 8,000 finally arrived in Shanxi the next year. So I'll have to go to the questions now. Okay. Get the book out. Bring this back. Where's my pointer? I hope they didn't steal it. There you go. Okay, whiteboard time. Pencil, before that Temujin comes. Okay, this is a whole long page, so I got more questions than just two. Okay, but it looks like most of them are short answers. Okay, all right. Okay, so remember when I talked to you about this earlier? Now you're going to have to give me an answer on it. Explain to me what was Mao's radically unorthodox approach to Marxism. Remember, it was different than the traditional Marxist-Leninist techniques or tactics. So please let me know that. I think I'm going crazy now for some reason. I've lost the page and I don't know what I'm doing. Wow, that's pretty good. And I'm even more confused. How does that happen? I always try to tell myself not to go crazy, but you know, I guess I cannot control myself sometimes. Interesting. I should be able to control myself, especially at my age since I'm 25. Oh my God. Okay, here's going to be another interesting question. In 1927, what did Mao do? Did he go to Disney World in Florida? Did he come to Universal Studios in Universal City? What did Mao do in 1927? It's a good question. It's not long. That's the LAPD looking for Titan. I think she stole another car. Better give it back, even though she's going to give it to Ken. And we use that pencil. Okay. 5. Who was Mao's enemy at this time? Was it Adolf Hitler? Was it Joseph Stalin? Was it Benito Mussolini? Was it the Emperor of Japan? Who was Mao's enemy at this time? Okay, believe it or not, I think I'm going to come up to the last question on this page. Again, the answers aren't long. Oops. What was the Long March? What was that? Was that kind of like a walking marathon where annually everybody walked from Beijing to Shanghai? I think Gao has done that a couple of times. She said it took her just a couple of hours to march from Shanghai to Beijing. So that's my guess there. So go ahead. Let me give you a few minutes to answer those four. Let me make my appropriate marks here. Okay, I've marked off the page we did. Let me mark off the questions. Let me bring the book back to make sure I'm following along correctly. Let me drink some of this Motai. Ooh, kind of weak, only 70%. Okay, you ready for me to get that eraser? Okie dokie. Eraser time. Or Mr. Hong grabs it. Okay, 3, again repeating. What was Mao's radically unorthodox approach to Marxism? Again, different than the traditional Russian Marxist-Leninist. Explain it to moi. 4, in 1927, what did Mao do? Did he go surfing in Malibu? What did he do in 1927? 5, who was Mao's enemy? Again, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Colonel Sanders, who was Mao's enemy? Or as my Korean students call him, KFC Harabuji. Okay, 6, what was the Long March? Are we to believe Gao? And that's the annual walk from Shanghai to Beijing. I don't know. Okie dokie, those are gone. Right. Go back to the delicious reading. So we ended, but we still have a little bit to go here. Okay, so I've begun the Long March. Okay, so that's this page. I'm on the next, and probably the next page, you're going to see an interesting photo. It might be a photo of me. Okay. All right, so repeating. Of the large number who had begun the Long March, only about 7,000 or 8,000 finally arrived in Shaanxi the next year, in October 1935. Along the way, however, Mao Zedong was able to blame the disastrous collapse of the Jiangxi Soviet, remember the Soviet Union, Russia, on mistakes made by others, and for the first time, 1935, that might be a good question for the final, established himself as the dominant or number one Ichiban figure in Chinese communism. Remember, he was not before. He had overseers, he had management. It was ironically Chiang Kai-shek's near success in exterminating. So we get exterminators now to kill all the bugs in your house, cockroaches. So they're saying that Chiang Kai-shek almost exterminated the Chinese communists at the time of the Long March. This helped raise Mao to the top of the communist leadership. So what they're saying there is all these high-level people were killed. Only left Mao. But also he had luck because this is what he would need. It would be the Japanese invasion of China and World War II, the start of World War II, that would provide the context or situation for a final communist victory, even though the Chinese communists had almost been exterminated at the time of the Long March. History is definitely interesting. Okay, so here's that photo. Is that me? No, I look a little different than that. It looks like maybe Gao's first husband. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Mao Zedong. Wow. So it says Mao Zedong at an airfield in China. So you can see the plane right there behind him. Okay. And probably it's a Shanxi in 1936, right before they had to leave. So here we go. What helps his cause? World War II in China. In 1936, Mao Zedong's little communist group settled on the remote Shanxi market town of Yan'an for its new headquarters. By this time, Chiang Kai-shek felt that he had the communists cornered and ordered his generals in the area to finish them off. Public opinion in China, however, was now generally more alarmed can you get it, by the growing Japanese menace. Menace means threat. Than the internal communist threat. And it says it also happened. So what this means is maybe before the main population in China was worried about the communists, but now with the strong, very strong Japanese army invading China, they kind of forgot about the communist threat. They were more worried about the Japanese army and how far they would go and what they would do. So, believe it or not, this page is very, very short, but I do have a question here. So I'm being kind, I know. Whiteboard. And still, okay, another question here. This will be 7, question 7. Seven, the only question for this small page with Mao Zedong's photo. What would provide context for a final communist victory? I went over that enough. I can't say anything right now without giving you a big, big hint. So take your time and answer that. And let me make my marks. Hopefully everyone's doing well. Okie dokie. So let me go get that eraser. Again, what would provide context for a final communist victory? So basically, what are the things that needed to happen that would have helped Mao reach his communist victory in China? Okay, so this one's gone. Let me go back to the reading. There's that picture again, handsome fellow. That's why Gao fell in love with him. So continuing. So, let's see here. Let me check something. Did this jump? Okay, we're fine. Looks good. It also happened that one of the principal nationalist commanders in Shanxi was none other than the son of the Manchurian warlord, who Mr. Oakland is related to, Zhang Zuolin, who had been assassinated by the Japanese in 1928 and who had himself been driven out of Manchuria by the Japanese establishment of their puppet state there. If anybody knows, the Japanese started calling it Manchukuo. The Chinese communists had, meanwhile, astutely changed their tactics. Astutely means very wisely. Change their tactics means their techniques. They were now promoting a truce. Truce is like a peace. In the domestic civil war with Chiang Kai-shek's Nationalist Party and the formation of a united front against Japan. So what the communists were asking then was, hey, Chiang Kai, I know you're fighting us because we're communists and you're the Nationalist Party, but Japan has invaded China. So how about for right now, we join forces together in a united front and we can fight Japan. Now you will learn of his reaction. When his generals in Shaanxi did not pursue the war against the communists as aggressively as Chiang would have liked, Chiang Kai-shek flew in person to the largest city in Shaanxi province, Xi'an, sometimes spelled either Xi'an or Xi'an, to encourage them to make greater efforts. There, at a hot springs located in the outskirts of the city, in what is known to history as the Xi'an Incident, in December 1936, Chiang Kai-shek was kidnapped by whom? His own troops. Like me, I have been kidnapped by my students before. And forced to negotiate with the communists and forced to agree to a formation of a united front with them against Japan. This Xi'an incident is important because it led to the start of World War II. A few months later, during the night of July 7, 1937, I'm in the middle of the page, a small detachment of Japanese troops were on maneuvers at Marco Polo Bridge, just a few miles outside of Beijing. Turning the wrong page there. Okay. Which was then called Beiping, Northern Peace, rather than Beijing, Northern Capital. That's a good question for my Chinese students. I can test them. Since it was not the capital of the Nationalist Republic. When some shots were fired, somebody shot guns, this might easily have remained a relatively insignificant or non-important incident, except that because of the formation of the United Front, Chiang Kai-shek's new determination to resist further Japanese aggression, Nationalist China responded by reinforcing its troops in the Beijing area. The Japanese also sent reinforcements, and by July 25th, full all-scale war had erupted. Wow, that's bad. Okay. Based on the ease with which a small number of Japanese soldiers had earlier overrun Manchuria, and widespread Japanese feelings of contempt, well, contempt is almost like hatred, for warlord China, the Japanese anticipated a quick victory. But be careful with your anticipations, people. They don't always turn out the way you want them to. That's why we have a saying, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. The war minister assured the Showa Emperor of Japan that this China incident would be over in a month. And in 1937, the Japanese cabinet authorized operations for only 3 divisions for 3 months. Although Chinese nationalist armies did put up surprisingly stiff resistance, especially in the Shanghai area, by December 13th, the nationalist capital at Nanjing, or Nanking, it's also called, had in fact fallen to the Japanese. There, the Japanese soldiers who had behaved with notably good discipline during the earlier war with Russia went on a notorious rampage known as the Rape of Nanking. So that's famous in history. They just did all kinds of bad things. The high level word is atrocities, with murderings of babies and pregnant women and killing and cutting people's heads off. It was terrible, terrible time for China. As you can see here, this is a baby terrified in a train station. It had been bombed out. Obviously, his parents are not around. The baby is bloody. So it was a terrible, terrible time for this war. So this is after a Japanese bombing at the start of World War II, August 28, 1937. So at the bottom of the page, although it took somewhat longer than the originally anticipated, the Japanese did swiftly capture most of the major Chinese cities and the principal agricultural plains of eastern China. But the nationalist Chinese capital merely retreated farther up the line of the Yangtze River, finally setting in the city of Chongqing, in English Chungking, in Sichuan province, a vast natural fortress protected by steep encircling mountains. Despite prolonged Japanese aerial bombing of Chongqing, the Chinese nationalists continued to resist. They were not going to give up and stubbornly refused to surrender. Okay. So this is where the end of the page is. If Yishuan has the book, right? This would be 267. So let me go and ask some questions here. And believe it or not, I don't have a lot of questions here. Wow. I'm being too soft. There's only so many questions I can ask about now. Right? Okay, so this would be question 8. I think I only have 2 for this page, even though it was a long page. So again, let me go through my little routine here. Right. So question 8. Okay, see, I'm supplying the date here. I'm not asking you for the date. So these donations are sent to my P.O. box. Question 8 is, what happened on July 7th, 1937, outside of Beijing? So this is something very important happened, which led to something else. Just let me know. Nine. What was the United Front? I think I've asked this question before, and I had a student, and they were Chinese, which makes it a little embarrassing. They said, "Oh, that's a soccer team in England." I said, "No, that soccer team is called Manchester United, not United Front." So please don't answer it was a soccer team. Okay. So I'll give you a minute or two to answer those two, or to at least write them down. Let me mark off that for Yishuan, I did page 267. Ask the appropriate questions. Bring the book back just to have as a reference. Okay, eraser time, because you only had 2 there. Teacher's being too kind, but I know I have to give you a review. So eraser is on 8. What happened on July 7th, 1937, just out of Beijing? I think that's when they opened the first Chick-fil-A in China. That's what happened. 9, what was the United Front? Again, not a soccer team in England. All right, and I think we're going to go to the end of the reading. Oh dear, can that happen? Okay. So, despite their repeated battlefield victories, Japanese found themselves unable to inflict any decisive defeat on Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist China. So they were not able to defeat them decisively in any battle. To the end of World War II, the Japanese found it necessary to continue to station about half of all their total available forces in China. Yet even that was not enough for conclusive success. So the Chinese fought for their lives and did a great job. I think the Japanese had higher level weapons at the time, but it didn't matter. After the Japanese offensive stalled or came to a stop, however, Chiang Kai-shek's ability to launch a counteroffensive was also seriously limited. Can anybody guess why? Don't forget about the United Front soccer team. Roughly 1 million Japanese troops held strategic, and that comes from the word strategy, central positions in China, while some 4 million Chinese troops were spread out in a vast surrounding arc. Arc is like a circle, often in highly mountainous terrain and linked together only by crude or roughly made roads and inadequate transportation facilities. And inadequate means these transportation facilities were not good, not up to a good standard. Much of China's industrial capacity, or factories, only modest to begin with, had been overrun by the Japanese. The nationalist Chinese government's arsenals or stockpiles we're now only able to produce about 4 bullets per soldier a month. That's pretty darn low. As a result of unresolved residual warlordism. Furthermore, at one time, half of Chiang Kai-shek's front line, here's the answer to what we talked about earlier, military commanders were men who had previously been in conflict with him. Don't understand that? It means half of his commanders were communists and were trying to kill him only a short time before they belonged to Mao. The result was a stalemate or tie. Neither the Chinese nor the Japanese were able to achieve a final victory. Good for the Chinese, they were brave. This stalemate degenerated or dissolved or destroyed itself into an increasingly cynical, phony war. Phony means fake. Lubricated, like you get a lube job for your car, greased with oil by persuasive smuggling across enemy lines, a glowing cloud of corruption. Oops. Yeah, no, let me see this. That was the end of our reading. Yay! So I gotta go to the, how many questions I got? I've got, well, it's up to you. You want 5 questions? I'll give you 5. I only have 1 here though. What do you think? Okay, let me get that pencil. One last question. Switch my papers here. Which pencil do I want? This one. Okay, question 10. Last question for this material for 9 or 7, 27, 20. What caused a major problem for Chiang Kai-shek in trying to defeat the Japanese? What was it? I can't really give you a hint because I just finished talking about it. So it'd be too easy and too fresh. So let me mark off our last page here. And let me mark off that I've asked you this question. So I'll answer it for you. I've got the long one, but I'll give you a short one so you can easily remember it, okay? But oops, I'm not supposed to give you the answer yet. Just tricking you. So I'll have you think that way. Think of the short one. Get the answer and think of how you can make it short, quick, and simple to remember for, because this questions will be on the final now, okay? All right, so let me go to the eraser. Erase it. Now we're done today for the 4th week, but I'm going to go over the questions and answers from the first 3 weeks because I had a student, I wonder who it was, and they were crying. Where's the review? Oh my God. And I said, I threw them all away. Remember, a lot of teachers do not do a review, but you know that I'm too kind with everybody. So I'll just leave it on the widescreen. You don't need to see a big picture of my face. So I've made my markings. So I'll get the questions and answers and just read them to you. So open those ears. Okay. First week. Do you remember the topic that we had? See, here's my notes. Here's the question. Was it Mexico? What country were we talking about? We're talking about Mongolia. Okay, so here we go. And remember, I'm not going to ask you every one of these questions. I'm going to throw most of them out. Unless you want me to. Could you imagine if I did all from each? Woo! Man, like 15, 16 each. So that would be, if I did 16 each week, that would be 48 questions. Normally I give like 16. So you can let me know. Okay, week 1, Mongolia. Question 1. The legendary story of the Mongols began with what? And it began with a fatal poisoning. Okay. What was the name of the Mongols' first leader? We have him in class, Mr. Temujin. Okay. He later took the title of what? Genghis Khan. Okay, 4 I'm going to throw out. Okay, 5. What did Genghis Khan believe? He believed that the sky god had given him a mission to bring the entire world under one sword. And I'm still waiting for Temujin in class to bring me his sword. I'd like to see it, even though I have a feeling Tal stole the sword. Okay. Where did Mongolia attack first? I've had some students say Mexico, Britain. No, the Jin dynasty, North China. Make sure both of those are in the answer if I ask this question. You don't like dates, so I'm not going to ask you when Genghis Khan died. I'll throw that out. Okay. I'll throw out the next one. 9. How far did the Mongols reach in Europe? That's important. Did they reach to K-Town? Did they reach to New York City? No. I said Europe. They reached Poland and Hungary. Okay. Okay, I'll throw out 10. Okay, 11. Which country did Kublai try to invade 2 times and fail? That was Japan. I will throw out 13, 12. 14 is a series of numbers. I'll throw that out. 15 is a date, so I'll have to give you the last one. What was the nickname, or what nickname did Korea have under Mongolian rule? Does anybody know what Korea's nickname was during the Mongolian rule? Does anybody know? Korea was called the son-in-law state. And that was because the Koreans, to keep peace, married a lot of their princesses to Mongolian princes. So they became known as the son-in-law state. Okay, that's week 1. Week 2. Does anybody remember week 2? Okay, that was early modern Asia. Okay. Okay, 1 can be confusing. I'll throw that out. Actually, 2 and 3 also. I don't want to confuse you too much. Here we go, 4. In China, signs of early modernity included what? So you tell me things that were considered modern. So we have appearance of commercialized goods and consumer culture, right? And let me sure I got this correct. The Gunpowder Empire. Yes. Forget that. Okay, 5, we can not have, that's not important. Okay, I'll throw that out. Okay, 7, who officially authorized trade between the Ming Dynasty and Japan in 1401? So I'm giving you the date. And that was Japan's shogun Yoshimitsu. All right, 8. Okay, I'll throw this up. This is more geographical. 9, which European country established the first permanent European presence in China? And that was Portugal. Okay. Okay, I'll throw out 10. That's a repetition of Portugal. 11, what literally was money in Ming China used for? Or what was used for money? Raw silver. Raw silver. Okay, 11's not that important. 13's important historically. Name 2 European inventions which had an impact on China. One was the telescope, and the other was European-styled world maps. Okay, and vice versa. 14, which Chinese philosophy influenced the European Enlightenment? That would be Confucianism. Confucius. Okay, I'll take out this one. Okay, I guess that's it for early modern Asia. And now we'll do last week's. Last week's. Does anybody remember the title of last week? A Westernization of Asia. Let me see. Okay, 1. What shattered China's confidence in 1895? And that was a defeat by Japan. 2, which is connected. Which incident also pushed China's Qing government to become modern? And that was the Boxer Rebellion disaster in 1900. Okay, 3, I'll throw out. Okay. I'll throw off 4. 5 is simpler. China was aiming toward what at this time? The answer was self-government. Okay, 6 is confusing. 7 is confusing. Who was China's first great nationalist revolutionary? Dr. Sun Yat-sen. If you go to the Chinatown, downtown LA, there's a big statue of him there. So you should know some historical figures from this era. So Sun Yat-sen wanted to create what in China? a Western style nation state and republic, not the communist situation that came later with Mao. Okay, 10, how did Japan perceive Korea at this time? Strategically vital because it was between them and China, and then Russia was on the other side. So strategically, Korea was important. Okay, we'll throw out 11. 12 was a number. Let me make sure I get this correctly. What was the Treaty of Portsmouth? And that was the end of the Russian-Japanese War. And I think that's it. Okay. Well, just a little tiny bit early ending today. So it's good to talk to everybody. And hopefully my student that was in a panic because where's the review material? Here it is, right? And you'll get it on the 27th, repeating. And then you'll have a whole week before the final. The midterm, which should be scheduled for the 3rd of August. So don't panic, be calm, take a deep breath, and you'll be fine. So nice speaking with everyone, and I'll prepare the material for what's coming after this. Okie dokie. Maybe it's the midterm. Who knows? Okay, so sayonara, and I'll see everybody next time. Thank you.